welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wonder. Today I am here to do the Jane Austen at Home tag. So I thought this would be the perfect tag to finish off my Jane Austen July, and I was tagged by the lovely The Personal Cozy Project. So thank you so much for tagging me. I actually had read Jane Austen at Home, the biography by Lucy Worsley, earlier this month, so it's the perfect time for me to do this while I'm still very much thinking about Jane Austen's homes and the homes she wrote about in her novels. This tag was created by Tilly over at Tilly's Shelf, and it takes the main homes out of Jane Austen's novels and creates questions around them. So I've got the questions here on my phone and I will be going through them. So the first question is based around Mansfield Park, and the quote they picked was, "The grandeur of the house astonished but could not console her. Name a grand book that may or may not have been difficult to read." So for this, I am going to have to choose Bleak House by Charles Dickens. This is the longest Dickens that I have read so far, which means it's probably also the longest book that I've ever read, and it definitely felt like a grand adventure while reading it. Like so many of Dickens' books, there are so many characters and interwoven plot lines that you can really get swept away in the story, but at the same time, because it's so long, you do get really invested in these people and how their lives are going to turn out. And of course, the titular Bleak House is also a grand country estate similar to Mansfield Park, so I think this book fits the first prompt perfectly. Then question 2 is based off of Barton Cottage from Sense and Sensibility. In comparison of Norland, it was poor and small indeed. Name a book about a household in difficult circumstances. So even though the book that I'm going to choose is not one of my favorite books, in fact I've given it 3 stars, I think 2 or 3 stars, and I may or may not have listed it as one of my biggest disappointments so far this year, but I am choosing to go with The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett for this question, because it really does center around a family that is trying to come back from terrible circumstances. So within the first chapter or 2 of this book, the main character's family loses everything in a Viking attack. Their little village is swarmed by Viking invaders, and everything is burned to the ground, and anything that didn't burn was stolen. So they used to be a family of boat builders. The father died in the attack, and they lost like all their lumber stores, their home, their equipment, and they have to try to build their lives back. So since the village is no longer habitable, they end up walking inland a few days and get given a plot of land on the outskirts of a little settlement that has grown up around a river ferry. And this plot of land had been abandoned by a number of previous farmers because it was too waterlogged to grow crops properly. So we watch them as they struggle through trying to make the land both sustain themselves and then try to make it profitable. And there is quite a bit of suffering that they have to go through, and times when they have to really ration out their food supplies. So that definitely brought to mind a family that is going through impoverished circumstances. Question number 3 comes from Emma's Hartfield, and that is, "I believe few married women are half as much mistress of their husband's house as I am of Hartfield. Name a book that you feel entirely the mistress of." So for this, I'm going to go with the book that I believe I have reread the most in my life, and that is, of course, Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Between rereading this book a million times and watching the movie adaptation another million times, I feel like this book is entirely a comfort read for me. I know exactly what's going to happen from chapter to chapter. When I turn the page, there are no surprises. I already know all the plot twists and jokes and sad moments that are coming. So I do feel like that is a book that I know entirely, and I can go back to any time that I want a read that is just a soothing, relaxing read where I can get swept up in the ambiance of the writing and not have to think too much anymore about the plot. Question number 4, Fullerton. "Now there was nothing so charming to her imagination as the unpretending comfort of a well-connected parsonage, something like Fullerton. Name a book containing a contented family." This was a little bit difficult because I feel like contented families are not very often represented in literature. But the first thing that came to mind is actually a children's book, and that is The All of a Kind Family from Sidney Taylor. And this is one of my all-time favorites from my childhood. It depicts a close-knit Jewish family with 5 sisters and a little brother who makes his appearance in later books in this series, but I still have so many fond memories of the contented family atmosphere that this book series displayed, and the antics and exploits that these girls get into, while also having so many beautiful references to their Jewish faith. Question number 5 is Rosine's Park from Pride and Prejudice. He declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlour at Rosine's, a comparison that did not at first convey much gratification. Name a book that other books are constantly being compared to. I have a couple books that I feel like I am always pulling out as comparisons on this channel, so I'll give 3. So for nonfiction, I feel like I'm always comparing books to The Five by Hailee Rubenhold, because that book to me did such an excellent job of weaving together facts with social history and the ordinary lives of everyday people in the time period in a way that was, while still conveying a lot of information, still very readable, and the storylines of people's lives were brought out in a way that made them feel like real people that I could empathize with, rather than just historical figures. So I feel like that book is what I'm always hoping historical nonfiction is. For contemporary fiction, I feel like I'm often comparing books to Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, because of the way she combined beautiful writing with such an interesting way of twisting and playing with perspectives, both of characters and of different time settings in the book. And then for classics, I feel like I'm often comparing books to Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, because that is one of my favorite classics, so it's kind of the benchmark that I hold up other classics to. Gaskell's writing is so immersive and realistic that they really feel like you're just watching real people living their lives. You're not reading about characters, but you're really catching up and visiting with these people as they live their lives. So when I'm reading classics and the characters feel more one-dimensional or unrealistic, I'm always like, oh, if only this was Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, but it's not. Question 6 is HMS Sloop the Asp. Quite worn out and broken up, I was the last man who commanded her. Shows a book that is looking the worse for wear. So for this, I have my copy of the first book in the Mitford series by Karon at home in Mitford. You can see it is a very well-loved edition. It's got a little cutout here in the cover. The spine is well cracked, and we've got some underlining and scribbles throughout. If you watched my vintage Lucy Maud Montgomery haul, you'll know the story behind this book and why it looks so beat up. This is a book that I inherited from my great aunt, who loved this series so much. It looks to me, because there is a little $4 mark in the front cover, that she probably bought this book secondhand herself and then proceeded to read and reread it and make it even more well loved. I'm guessing that this was her because she loved making little bulletin board displays, so I'm guessing that whatever little graphic was here she cut out and used on some sort of poster board in her bedroom. And I just love this book. I love reading from it. I love having some of her underlines in it, so even though it's a very beat up copy, it is one that I will cherish and keep forever. Question 7 is Northanger Abbey from Northanger Abbey. An abbey. Yes, it was delightful to really be in an abbey, but she doubted as she looked around the room whether anything within her observation would have given her the consciousness. Name a book that wasn't as creepy or dramatic as you thought it would be. For this, I'm going with Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, and I did absolutely love this book. It is a fantastic mystery. I read it around Christmas time, and it was the absolute perfect Christmas read with the whole snowed in on a train setting. But it definitely was not as creepy as I was expecting. It was only the second Christie book that I had read, with the first one being And Then There Were None. And Then There Were None is definitely very creepy, and the sort of book that you're kind of like reading through your fingers because you're so scared of what's going to happen next. And so I kind of thought that maybe that was Christie's writing style. And then I read Murder on the Orient Express, which, while being a fantastic mystery, is definitely more procedural and investigative rather than creepy and dramatic. Question 8, Portsmouth. The smallness of the house and the thinness of the walls brought everything so close to her that, added to the fatigue of the journey and all her recent agitation, she hardly knew how to bear it. Name a book that disappointed you when you revisited it. So I don't actually reread books very often. Kind of the exception is that I sometimes reread childhood favorites. So there aren't very many times that I reread a book at all, let alone reread a book and then have it disappoint me, because typically I'm rereading books only that I absolutely love. But I will say, when I reread Little Women by Louisa May Alcott before watching the 2020 adaptation, I was a little bit disappointed by it. I did remember enjoying it so much in my early teen years and relating so much to the characters, particularly Jo, and when I read it this time, it just did not have the same magic really for me. I did enjoy the second half, the Good Wives half, a little bit better, and so I'm wondering if maybe I'm just kind of outgrowing it, but it did make me a bit sad because I had so many fond memories of that book, and when I reread it, I just didn't love it as much as I had in the past. Question 9, Kelly Lynch Hall. Principal seat, Kelly Lynch Hall in the county of Somerset. Name a book from your ancestral home. So if you've watched pretty much any video on my channel, you know I love books set in my ancestral home, and that's why I have a whole series, Reading Through My Family Tree, where I read books that are related to different parts of my lineage. So there are literally dozens of books that I could pick for this challenge, but I'm going to go with the book series that really set off my love for reading ancestrally, and that is the Lewis Trilogy by Peter May. These are 3 mystery novels that are very gritty and atmospheric, and they are set on the Isles of Lewis and Harris, in the Outer Hebrides, which is a remote part of Scotland that part of my family comes from. I had visited Harris in 2014, and in pretty much every gift store or boutique or hotel lobby that you went into in this area, they had these books out for sale, and so I could feel that there was kind of a local pride in these book series, and I knew I had to pick them up when I got back home, and they did not disappoint. Reading Peter May's books set in the Outer Hebrides brings me right back to my time there. They are so evocative of the setting, and I do have such a strong emotional attachment to that area because it is so strongly rooted in my ancestry that even though the subject matter is very scary at times and fairly creepy, I still really enjoyed reading them because it just brought me right back to my time on the islands. And then the last question, question 10, Pemberley from Pride and Prejudice. They had now entered a beautiful walk by the side of the water, and every step was bringing forward a nobler fall of ground. Name a book that you are ready to dive into. So the next book that I'm planning to read just came in actually on my Libby app. I had it on hold for a while, and that is The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kadish. That's the cover. I'll read the blurb. It sounds absolutely fantastic. It's got a dual time narrative as well as aspects of pandemic fiction, which are 2 things that I definitely enjoy reading about. Set in London of the 1660s and of the early 21st century, The Weight of Ink is the interwoven tale of 2 women of remarkable intellect. Esther Velasquez, an immigrant from Amsterdam who is permitted to scribe for a blind rabbi just before the plague hits the city, and Helen Watt, an alien historian with a love of Jewish history. When Helen is summoned by a former student to view a cache of newly discovered 17th century Jewish documents, she enlists the help of Aaron Levy, an American graduate student as impatient as he is charming, and embarks on one last project to determine the identity of the document's scribe, the elusive elf. Electrifying and ambitious, The Weight of Ink is about women separated by centuries and the choices and sacrifices they must make in order to reconcile the life of the heart and the mind. So it sounds like a historical fiction read that's going to really appeal to me, and I'm very excited to get started on that. And then the bonus question is, which of these homes would you most like to live in? And as much as I want to say Pemberley, that is not really where my heart lies. My heart really is with Barton Cottage, particularly the Barton Cottage of the 2008 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. That little white English cottage right on the cliffside of the sea, with a space for a little garden, and those beautiful rooms with windows that you could throw open and smell the sea air. That is the house that I would pick, and I think where I'd feel most at home from the houses in Jane Austen's novels. So thank you so much to the Personal Cozy Project for tagging me to do this video, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.